With 28 broken bones, my son was confined to a hospital bed, the victim of a brutal assault by a group of self-proclaimed HOA police. They believed the homeowners association provided them with a shield of impunity, oblivious to the fact that I had served for 15 years as a federal prosecutor. Now, those responsible were looking at life sentences, and I am about to recount how I uncovered a pervasive corruption ring operating within our own neighborhood. This story is a testament to how power-abusing bullies can be confronted within one's own community. The memory of our move to Oakage Estates is still vivid. Our real estate agent endlessly praised its premier private security system and close-knit community atmosphere. My wife, Sarah, was enchanted by the expansive park at the heart of the development, and our son, Tyler, was captivated by the Olympic-sized community pool. Following 15 years as a federal prosecutor handling cases involving drug cartels and organized crime, I was eager for some tranquility. A particularly high-stakes case concerning the Rivera cartel had led to threats against my family, and the mounting stress was taking a toll on my health. Consequently, at the age of 52, I opted for early retirement, and we allocated a considerable part of our savings to what we anticipated would be our permanent home. On the surface, the neighborhood appeared idyllic, with meticulously maintained streets, perfect lawns, and neighbors who offered friendly smiles and waves as we unloaded our furniture. I should have been more discerning. My career had taught me to be wary of polished exteriors that conceal underlying decay. Yet, I desperately wanted to believe we had discovered a sanctuary, so I chose to overlook the warning signs. The first inkling of an issue arose approximately 3 months after we had moved in. The HOA fees, initially presented as $300 per month during our home purchase, abruptly jumped to $450, accompanied by a nebulous explanation about improving security measures. I made it a point to attend the subsequent homeowners meeting to ask about this increase. It was there that I first encountered Karen Whitaker, the HOA president. A woman in her early 60s, she had immaculately coiffed silver hair and a smile that seemed disingenuous. "Mr. Sullivan," she greeted, her handshake surprisingly strong, "we are merely upholding Oakage's exceptional standards. The security team merits appropriate pay for their commitment to our safety." There was something about her attitude that triggered my internal alarms, but I dismissed it as professional paranoia. The next cause for concern was the security staff I observed around the neighborhood. They operated vehicles that bore a striking resemblance to police cruisers, even featuring light bars, though theirs were amber, not red and blue. Their uniforms could easily be mistaken for law enforcement attire at a distance, and they carried themselves with an air of authority that felt unwarranted for what were essentially private guards. "Don't you find them a bit imposing for a neighborhood watch?" I remarked to Michael Chan, our next-door neighbor and a law professor at the local university. Michael cast a nervous look over his shoulder before he answered. "Just between us, they have become more assertive since Karen became HOA president 3 years ago. Last month, they fined the Jenkins family $2,000 because their son had friends over after the noise curfew. When Mr. Jenkins challenged it, security visited his workplace the next day, claiming they were following up on complaints. He paid the fine and has been silent ever since. I stored this information away but chose not to act on it. A part of me, the part that had spent a lifetime fighting battles, yearned for peace. Moreover, Tyler was flourishing. At 17, he was setting new records for the track team, and several colleges had already shown interest in offering him athletic scholarships. Sarah had secured a teaching role at the local elementary school and was more content than I had seen her in a long time. I concluded that I could tolerate a zealous HOA if it ensured my family's happiness. That willful ignorance shattered on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I was getting ready for a 3-day consulting engagement in Washington, D.C. when Tyler stormed into my home office, his face red with frustration. "Dad, this is ridiculous. The Wilsons reported me for parking improperly in front of our house." He handed me a sheet of paper, an official HOA notice for a $500 fine related to parking violations and for displaying an inappropriate attitude unbecoming of an Oakage resident. As I looked over the document, I saw it was signed by Marcus Reed, the chief of Oakage Security. "This is illogical," I said with a frown. "You always park in the driveway." Tyler ran a hand through his dark hair, a telltale sign of his frustration since he was a child. "I had to park on the street for maybe 20 minutes so Mom could get her car out." Mr. Wilson came out and started giving me a lecture about obstructing his view of the street, which I wasn't. When I tried to respond, he just turned around and called security. I'd already moved the car by the time they arrived. but they still issued the ticket. I was about to reassure him that I would take care of it when an email notification appeared on my phone. The sender was unlisted, but the message sent a chill down my spine. Your son needs to learn some respect. Athletic scholarships can vanish with just one negative incident report. The HOA office accepts apologies between 2 o'clock and 4 p.m. daily. Tyler noticed the change in my expression and took my phone. His face turned white as he read the email. Dad, they can't do that, can they? They can't jeopardize my college opportunities. I tried to project a calm I didn't feel. No, they absolutely cannot. This is straightforward intimidation. I will handle this upon my return from DC. In the meantime, please avoid the HOA people. Don't confront them. Don't argue. Tyler agreed, but I could sense the fury simmering beneath his reluctant compliance. I should have postponed my trip. That single choice will forever haunt me, because 2 days later, while I was in a conference room reviewing security protocols with old colleagues, I got a call from St. Mary's Hospital. Tyler had been hospitalized with numerous fractures and internal injuries. The physician on the line, a Dr. Alicia Martinez, spoke with detached professionalism, yet I could detect the concern in her voice. Mr. Sullivan, your son has suffered 28 fractures, mainly to his limbs and ribs. The injury pattern is suggestive of, well, it's in line with a premeditated assault, not a random accident or a simple fight. He's in stable condition, but he will require several surgeries. My world imploded as I listened to her list my son's injuries. Is he conscious? Can I talk to him? I asked, already packing my belongings and signaling to my colleagues that I had to leave. He is currently sedated, Dr. Martinez answered. Your wife is here with him. He was conscious upon admission and informed the staff that he was attacked by HOA security personnel when he visited the association office. The room felt like it was spinning. I'm on my way, I managed to say before ending the call. I got on the earliest flight back, my thoughts racing with increasingly grim scenarios. When I reached the hospital 8 hours later, Sarah was a mess. Her eyes were swollen from crying, yet her face was set with a fury I had rarely witnessed in our 2 decades of marriage. They're claiming it was self-defense, Robert, she seethed as I walked into the ICU waiting area. They alleged Tyler attacked them first, and they had to restrain him. Restrain him? Look what they did to our son. She displayed photos on her phone. Tyler's body was a landscape of deep purple bruises and unnaturally twisted limbs. His face was swollen so badly he was unrecognizable, with a tube inserted down his throat to assist his breathing. A cold rage settled over me, a feeling I had known only a handful of times in my career when facing the absolute worst of humanity. Where is the security footage? I questioned, my prosecutor's mind instinctively beginning to assemble the necessary evidence. Sarah shook her head, tears cascading down her cheeks. They claimed the cameras at the HOA office were malfunctioning. How convenient, right? And there were no witnesses, or at least none who were willing to testify. I took her hand and squeezed it gently. Sarah, listen to me closely. As of this moment, we are at war. These people have no clue who they are up against. I need you to be strong for Tyler and for what is about to unfold. That evening, with Tyler sedated in the ICU, I had a meeting with Dr. Martinez in her office. She was a petite woman in her 40s with sharp, observant eyes. Without any preamble, she brought up X-rays on her monitor. Mr. Sullivan, I have been in trauma medicine for 15 years, including a period as a forensic examiner. These injuries tell a story, and it is not the one being circulated by the security team. She indicated specific fractures on the images. These spiral fractures in his fingers and wrists are classic defensive injuries. They happen when someone tries to shield themselves. These breaks in the ribs and legs indicate direct, focused trauma consistent with strikes from a baton or kicks. And most revealingly, several of these fractures display what we term boot prints, the distinct pattern left when a limb is stomped on with significant force. She leaned back, her expression grave. In my professional judgment, your son was restrained and methodically beaten over an extended period. This was not a fight. It was torture. I felt a wave of nausea, but compelled myself to think with clarity. Would you be willing to document this officially and testify if necessary? Dr. Martinez agreed without a moment's hesitation. I have already incorporated my analysis into his medical file, and yes, I will testify. What was done to your son was criminal, Mr. Sullivan, plain and simple. As I was leaving her office, I noticed a familiar face at the nurse's station. Detective Lisa Ramirez from the city police department. We had collaborated on a few federal cases some years back. She glanced up as I came closer, her expression deliberately neutral. Robert Sullivan, I heard you were retired. I nodded, getting straight to the point. My son is the assault victim in the ICU. I need to know what action is being taken. Detective Ramirez sighed and motioned for me to join her in a more private corner. I'm assigned to the case, but I'll be honest with you. It's a tricky situation. The security team has submitted their own report alleging self-defense. They claim your son became violent when they informed him of the potential repercussions for his disruptive conduct. Without video evidence or witnesses to challenge their account, it's a difficult case to build. I struggled to keep my voice even. My son has 28 broken bones. Dr. Martinez has documented that the injuries align with a prolonged, deliberate assault. That is not self-defense. Ramirez held up a hand. I know, and I believe you. But to make an arrest, I need more than a medical assessment. I require tangible proof of criminal intent, witnesses, and ideally, video footage. Give me something I can use, Robert. As she departed, I knew I was on my own, at least for the time being. And that was when a plan began to take shape in my mind. The following morning, I contacted Frank Delgado, a former colleague who now operated a private investigation agency. Frank was at the hospital in less than an hour, his large frame seeming to fill the small consultation room where we met. His expression grew somber as he viewed the pictures of Tyler. Jesus, Robert, this is medieval. I nodded grimly. I need you to dig up everything you can on the Oak Ridge HOA board members, particularly Karen Whitaker and the security chief, Marcus Reed. I also need surveillance on my home and family. These individuals have already demonstrated what they are willing to do. Frank responded without hesitation. Consider it done. I'll have a team deployed by this evening. As he prepared to leave, he paused. Robert, be careful. If they are willing to do this to a teenager, they won't think twice about coming after you. I knew he was correct, but backing down was no longer an option. While Tyler embarked on his long journey to recovery, I began constructing my case. Frank's preliminary discoveries were eye-opening. Marcus Reed had been fired from the Riverside Police Department 5 years prior after numerous complaints of excessive force. 2 of his officers had similar histories, men who were considered too aggressive or corrupt for public law enforcement, but had found a niche in private security, where regulation was lax. It turned out that Karen Whitaker had previously been a real estate agent before retiring and had ties to several local development firms. Her second-in-command, Greg Thompson, was a lawyer specializing in real estate who had been reprimanded twice by the Bar Association for ethical breaches. A picture was starting to form, but I needed more. I dedicated the next few days to visiting neighbors, carefully trying to gather information. Most were hesitant to speak, their fear evident. But a few, after I assured them of confidentiality, shared stories that pointed to a consistent pattern. The Jenkins family, as Michael had told me, had been fined repeatedly for trivial infractions until they were forced to sell their house at a considerable loss. The Rodriguezes had been threatened with a lawsuit for installing solar panels without the correct approval, even though they had complied with all city ordinances. And Elaine Washington, a 70-year-old widow whose husband had passed away from a heart attack the year before, revealed that he had been under severe stress from HOA harassment over disputed fees. Harold was an accountant, she confided, her voice barely a whisper as we sat in her perfectly kept living room. He kept insisting something was wrong with the HOA's finances, but no one would pay attention. The day before he died, we got a foreclosure notice for unpaid fees we had already paid and had receipts for. 10 days following the assault, Tyler was discharged from the hospital. He was in a wheelchair, his arms and legs in casts, and his spirit was subdued but not extinguished. I just wanted to tell them they couldn't intimidate me, he said as I helped him get settled in his bedroom, which had been converted with a hospital bed and medical supplies. I didn't even yell, Dad. I swear. But the moment I brought up the email, Reed got this strange look on his face. He signaled to the other men, and they pulled me into a back room. His voice trailed off, his eyes filled with a haunted expression. I squeezed his shoulder gently. You don't need to discuss it right now, but when you're ready, I need to know every detail. That afternoon, I got a call from the HOA office. Karen Whitaker herself wanted to meet with me to resolve the unfortunate situation. Despite Sarah's objections, I consented to the meeting. I had a good idea of what they would propose, and I needed to assess how desperate they were. The HOA office was in a small building by the community center, a modest structure that betrayed no sign of the corruption it housed. Karen met me with that same artificial smile, while Greg Thompson and Marcus Reed flanked her like sentinels. Reed's face was a careful mask, but I noticed the tension in his shoulders. Good. He ought to be scared. Robert, may I call you Robert? We are simply devastated by what happened to Tyler, Karen started, her voice laden with feigned sympathy. While we stand by our security team's appropriate actions when threatened, we acknowledge that the situation escalated beyond what anyone desired. Greg pushed a document across the table. We are willing to cover all of Tyler's medical costs and provide a settlement of $100,000. In exchange, we just require a non-disclosure agreement and the retraction of any complaints made to the police. I looked at the document, then at them, keeping my face impassive. And what if I decline? Marcus shifted in his chair, his hand twitching slightly. Karen's smile turned brittle. Well, in that case, we would have to move forward with our countersuit against Tyler for assaulting our staff. And considering the current sentiment regarding violence against authority figures, that could pose a problem for his future. I rose slowly, taking the document. I will have my attorney review this. As I turned to go, Karen's voice grew sharp. No one prevails when they challenge the HOA. Robert, consider the consequences for your family very carefully. I stopped at the door and turned back to them. Is that a threat, Karen? Her smile returned, as cold as ice. Merely a statement of fact. We have been here for a long time. Residents may come and go, but the HOA endures. Walking to my car, I knew I had just been threatened, but as Detective Ramirez had pointed out, without a recording or witnesses, it was simply my word against theirs. That evening, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of Sarah leaving her school, captioned, "Does she always walk to her car by herself?" The war had officially intensified. I called Frank right away, and by that night, Sarah and Tyler had security details. Our house was equipped with discrete cameras both inside and out, and our cars had tracking devices installed. I also contacted Jason Kim, an attorney who specialized in HOA law. He agreed to take our case pro bono after reviewing Tyler's medical records. What they are doing is illegal on numerous levels, Jason stated as we sat in my living room, surrounded by papers. HOAs are authorized to enforce covenants, but they are not permitted to impersonate law enforcement. They cannot use physical force, and they certainly cannot engage in targeted harassment. He pointed to the settlement offer. And this is essentially blackmail. They are jeopardizing your son's future if you refuse to stay silent. I nodded, having reached the same conclusion. But we need more than just our word against theirs. We need solid proof of a pattern of abuse. Jason leaned in, his expression grave. Then we need to find other people willing to testify, and we need to trace the money. In my experience, when HOAs act like this, there is typically a financial incentive. That night, sleep eluded me. I sat in our unlit kitchen, going over everything I knew. There was a missing piece, something that would bring the entire scheme into focus. Then I recalled what Elaine had said about her husband's concerns regarding the HOA's finances. The next morning, I went to see her again, this time with a clear purpose. Harold kept meticulous records of everything, Elaine explained, showing me to a small home office that had been left untouched since her husband passed away. He didn't trust computers much, so it's all in these ledgers and files. She retrieved several thick folders from a filing cabinet. After he passed, I couldn't bring myself to go through them, but I couldn't part with them either. Perhaps they can help you. I spent hours poring over Harold's detailed notes. He had documented HOA fee hikes, expenses, and property transactions within the neighborhood for years. Gradually, a pattern became clear. Over the last 3 years, since Karen had taken over the HOA, an unusually large number of homes had been sold, often after the owners had endured escalating fines and harassment. Most tellingly, while the properties seemed to have been bought by various individuals, Harold had traced the ownership back to a network of shell companies, all of which were ultimately linked to a single entity, Whitaker and Associates. Karen's own real estate firm, which she had supposedly closed down years ago, was surreptitiously acquiring properties in the neighborhood. But for what reason? The answer appeared when I compared Harold's notes with publicly available city planning documents. A proposal was in its initial stages for a significant commercial and luxury apartment complex that would necessitate the rezoning of residential areas, including Oakage Estates. If it were approved, the land's value would soar. It was a classic land grab, with the HOA being used as a tool to push out homeowners who were unwilling to sell. Armed with this theory, I contacted a former associate at the city planning office who confirmed my suspicions off the record. The proposal is not public yet, but a firm called Maxwell Development has been collaborating closely with Councilwoman Torres to prepare the groundwork. They need to acquire 70% of the properties to compel a dissolution of the HOA and alter the zoning regulations. I thanked him and requested one more piece of information: a list of the properties that had already been sold in Oakage. The findings were alarming. Karen and her accomplices had already secured nearly 65% of the homes. It was no wonder they were becoming more forceful with holdouts like us. The next stage of my inquiry brought me to James Peterson, a former resident who had moved away 6 months prior after numerous conflicts with the HOA. Frank located him in an apartment 30 miles away. James, a software engineer in his early 40s, was hesitant to talk at first, but when I brought up Harold Washington's financial findings, his demeanor shifted. "Come in," he said, glancing down the hallway before shutting his door. "I've been waiting for someone to connect the dots." James's apartment was sparsely furnished, with moving boxes still piled up. He guided me to a computer setup that looked overly sophisticated for the small room. "Before I moved out, I created a backdoor into the HOA's computer network," he explained, his fingers moving rapidly over the keyboard. "They hired me 2 years ago to upgrade their security cameras and network. When they started harassing me, I sensed something was wrong, so I gave myself a way in, just in case." What James revealed next was the definitive proof I needed: emails between Karen, Greg, Marcus, and a man named Richard Maxwell, the CEO of Maxwell Development. The messages laid out their strategy to acquire enough properties to push through the rezoning proposal, with potential profits in the hundreds of millions. Even more unsettling were the direct discussions about employing the security team to pressure reluctant homeowners into selling. One email from Karen specifically referenced our family. The Sullivans could be an issue. The father's law enforcement background means we must apply pressure strategically. Concentrate on the son. Teenagers are more susceptible to intimidation. A subsequent email, sent just before Tyler's assault, was chilling in its conciseness. "The Sullivan matter needs immediate action. Reed will take care of it." I copied all the files James provided, my hands trembling with fury. As I was about to leave, James caught my arm. "Be careful. These people have a great deal to lose. They won't just surrender because you found some emails." His warning turned out to be prescient. As I was driving home that evening, I saw a black SUV tailing me. Instead of going to my house, I drove to the police station and parked directly in the visitor's lot. The SUV continued past without stopping. When I finally got home 2 hours later, after taking a roundabout path to ensure I wasn't being followed, I discovered signs of a break-in. My home office had been rifled through, with papers strewn on the floor and my computer on, though I clearly remembered turning it off. Fortunately, I had foreseen such an event and had all my evidence on encrypted drives stored in a safe deposit box. Nevertheless, the violation of our home, the very place where my injured son was recuperating, filled me with a cold rage. That night, I convened Sarah, Tyler, Michael Chan, and Frank in our kitchen, with Jason joining us on a secure video call. "It's time to take the offensive," I informed them, detailing my discoveries. "But I need assistance. We can't do this by ourselves." Over the following week, we methodically assembled our coalition. Michael connected with other university professors residing in Oakage. Frank got in touch with former law enforcement personnel in the area who might be supportive. Sarah discreetly conversed with parents at her school who were also residents of the neighborhood. We established a secure messaging group named Oakage United, where residents could safely recount their experiences with the HOA's harassment. The stories came flooding in: exorbitant fines, threats, and acts of vandalism attributed to local teenagers that strangely ceased once homes were listed for sale. Several residents mentioned being followed by security vehicles when they left for work or came home late. One family had their water supply inexplicably cut off for 3 days during a heat wave, only to be informed it was due to maintenance. Most disturbingly, at least 3 elderly residents had been threatened with calls to Adult Protective Services for property neglect when they had difficulty with yard work due to health problems. As our body of evidence grew, I also contacted Samantha Peterson, an investigative journalist at the local paper known for her coverage of housing injustice. "This is more than just a power-crazed HOA," I clarified when we met at a coffee shop far from Oakage. "This involves corrupt officials, real estate fraud, and assault. These individuals nearly killed my son as part of a multi-million-dollar land acquisition scheme." Samantha was initially doubtful, but the documentation I presented, carefully chosen to safeguard our sources, persuaded her to investigate further. I'll need time for independent verification, she advised. And I will have to seek comment from the HO board before I publish anything. I agreed, aware that this would reveal our strategy but also recognizing the journalistic imperative. Just be cautious. These people are dangerous. While Samantha pursued her investigation, our neighborhood coalition expanded. We now had over 60 families on board, making up most of the properties not yet in the hands of Karen's shell companies. Just as we were about to present our findings to Detective Ramirez and the district attorney's office, the HOA initiated its counteroffensive. Every member of our coalition was served with a notice of HOA violations, with fines from $500 to several $1,000s. My own notice alleged that our lawn was half an inch too long, our mailbox was the wrong shade of black, and our backyard fence required repainting. The total fines amounted to $17,500, payable within 30 days, or a lien would be put on our property. Jason promptly filed for an emergency injunction to stop all HOA actions against coalition members, contending that these were acts of retaliation. Judge William Harmon, who was assigned our case, issued a temporary stay as he examined the evidence. This small one gave us a glimmer of hope, but it was fleeting. The next evening, as I was assisting Tyler with his physical therapy exercises in our living room, our security system flagged movement at the rear of the house. The camera footage showed Marcus Reed and two other security officers trying to get in through our patio door. I immediately dialed the police and our private security team. By the time Officer Brian Wilson, a contact of Frank's who had been informed about our situation, arrived, Reed and his men were at the front door, now in their full security gear, asserting they were performing a routine safety inspection for the HOA. "Show me the legal authority that permits you to enter a private residence," I demanded, recording the exchange on my phone. Reed's face twisted with barely contained anger. "HOA bylaws grant us the right to inspect properties for violations." Officer Wilson stepped in. "Actually, HOA representatives cannot enter private property without the owner's permission unless there's an emergency, such as a water leak that could damage other properties. So, unless you have a court order or can prove an emergency, you need to leave." Reed scowled at me as he retreated. "This isn't finished, Sullivan. You have no idea who you're messing with." I gave him a cold smile. "Actually, I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Marcus. Former Officer Reed, let go from Riverside PD for excessive force against a 17-year-old. 3 civil suits settled. Hard by Oak Ridge Security, despite your record, because Karen Whitaker needed someone who was willing to break the rules." His face lost all color as I detailed his past. "You should consider if Karen and Maxwell will support you when this all collapses. In my experience, people like them always look for a scapegoat." As he left in a rage, I knew we had reached the final stage of our fight. The next morning, I got a call from Elaine Washington. Her voice was trembling with a mix of excitement and fear. "Robert, I discovered something else of Harold's. He had a safety deposit box I was unaware of. The bank got in touch with me about renewal payments, and when I went to inspect it, you have to see this." What Elaine had unearthed was dynamite. A complete dossier Harold had assembled on the HOA's financial malfeasance, including bank statements that showed money being funneled from HOA funds into Karen's personal accounts and those of her shell companies. There were also recordings. Harold had evidently worn a hidden recording device to several closed HOA meetings where Karen and Greg were heard openly talking about using security to intimidate residents. In one particularly damning recording from just 2 weeks before his death, Karen was heard saying, "If Washington doesn't drop the financial review, have Reed pay him a visit. These elderly people need to learn that heart conditions can be worsened by stress." Harold had been putting together evidence for a major fraud investigation, intending to take it to the FBI when he had his fatal heart attack, an attack that now seemed suspiciously opportune. With this new evidence, I got in touch with Agent Christine Lewis at the FBI's White-Collar Crime Unit, another former colleague. After she reviewed what we had, she concluded that the case justified a federal inquiry. This spans multiple jurisdictions: fraud, racketeering, potential civil rights violations, and if we can prove what happened to your son and possibly Mr. Washington, we could be looking at charges for assault, battery, and even manslaughter, she detailed. But I need 24 hours to secure the necessary warrants. Can you refrain from making any moves until then? I consented, even though every part of me screamed for immediate action. That evening, Samantha Peterson's initial article went live online. Neighborhood Nightmare. HOA security accused of brutal assault on teenager. The article described Tyler's injuries and featured statements from Dr. Martinez regarding the nature of the attack. It also questioned the credentials of the security staff and alluded to financial misconduct within the HOA. In a matter of hours, the story went viral, with national news organizations picking it up. Karen's reaction was immediate. A press release that condemned the defamatory and false allegations and declared an emergency HOA meeting for the next evening to address community concerns. I was certain this meeting was their bid to seize control of the narrative and potentially fast-track their plans before we could intervene. Frank successfully placed a reliable contact as part of the catering team for the meeting, equipped with recording equipment. What we captured surpassed our darkest fears. Karen, clearly on edge, laid out the full extent of their scheme to the HOA board members who were not yet in on the conspiracy. The deal with Maxwell Development is nearly finalized. Once we hit the 70% ownership mark, which is just a few properties away, we can force the HOA's dissolution and get the rezoning approved. Each of you who has backed us will get a 5% bonus on your property's value, plus options for discounted units in the new development. But this Sullivan problem jeopardizes everything. Maxwell is becoming anxious. Richard Maxwell himself then spoke to the group. I have talked to Judge Harmon and Councilwoman Torres. They are still on our side, but this bad press is a problem. We must speed up our schedule. Any remaining holdouts must be handled at once, by any means necessary. Armed with this recording and all our preceding evidence, I met with Agent Lewis the following morning. By that afternoon, the FBI had obtained warrants for Karen Whitaker, Greg Thompson, Marcus Reed, Richard Maxwell, Councilwoman Torres, and Judge Harmon. The arrests were coordinated to occur at the same time to avoid any tip-offs or destruction of evidence. I made sure to be there when they arrested Reed. I wanted him to see my face. The FBI tactical team entered the security office at 6 a.m. Reed was already there, shredding papers, when the agents stormed in. The look of utter shock on his face when he saw me standing next to Agent Lewis is an image I will never forget. Marcus Reed, you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, and violation of civil rights under color of authority, Lewis stated as Reed was placed in handcuffs. As they led him by me, I said just loud enough for him to hear, 28 broken bones, Marcus. That's what you did to my 17-year-old son. From what I know, inmates have a special place in their pecking order for people who harm children. The takedown of the corruption ring became a national story. Karen and her accomplices were indicted on numerous felonies, ranging from racketeering and fraud to conspiracy and assault. The FBI's inquiry found that their operation went beyond Oakage, affecting 2 other neighborhoods in adjacent counties. Maxwell Development stock nosedived after the scandal emerged, and Richard Maxwell faced additional charges for bribing public officials. As for Marcus Reed and the officers who attacked Tyler, they were confronted with the most severe charges. With the medical evidence, testimony from coalition members about prior threats and intimidation, and the email that explicitly instructed Reed to handle the Sullivan situation, the prosecutors were certain they could get convictions for aggravated assault, which carried a sentence of up to 25 years in our state. The evidence also hinted that Harold Washington's death might not have been entirely from natural causes, although proving murder would be more challenging. 6 months later, Tyler was present for the first day of Reed's trial, walking with a cane, but walking nonetheless. Dr. Martinez had informed us that some of his injuries might never completely heal, that he could always live with pain, and that his promising athletic career was likely finished. Yet, sitting next to me in that courtroom, his head held high as he got ready to testify about what was done to him, my son demonstrated a resilience that no amount of physical force could crush. During a recess in the trial, Tyler turned to me, his face serious. "Dad, do you think we would have found out what they were doing if they hadn't hurt me?" I thought about his question for a moment before replying. Eventually, yes. People like that always push too far. But it might have been too late for many families. What happened to you is unforgivable, but you were the catalyst that brought their whole operation down. He nodded, absorbing this. Then at least something positive came from it. And Dad, thank you for not giving up until you got justice, not just for me, but for everyone. In the end, Reed and 2 of his officers were found guilty on all counts and given 20-year sentences each, effectively life sentences for men of their age. Karen, Greg, and Maxwell got 15-year sentences for their involvement in the conspiracy, while Councilwoman Torres and Judge Harmon received 10 years each for corruption and abuse of power. The HOA was dissolved, and a community oversight committee was established to form a new, transparent organization with clear restrictions on its power and enforcement authority. Many families who had been forced out were able to file civil suits for damages, though no amount of money could undo the harm that had been done. As for our family, we remained in Oakage. Some neighbors were taken aback by this choice, thinking we would sell and find a place without such painful associations. But as I explained to Sarah one evening while we sat on our porch, watching Tyler talk with Michael's son across the street, leaving would feel like letting them win in a small way. This is our home. We fought for it. And now we have a chance to help create the community we thought we were moving into. Today is the 2-year anniversary of the arrests. Tyler is in his second year of college, studying law instead of focusing on sports. He has a slight limp that is more noticeable when he is tired, but his spirit is undiminished. The new community association has become an example for other neighborhoods, with transparent finances, strict caps on fines and enforcement, and a democratically elected board that changes every year. I still occasionally get messages from people around the country who have read our story, seeking advice on how to handle their own HOA issues. My answer is always the same: document everything. Form community alliances. Follow the money. And never, ever retreat when you are confronted with injustice. Whether it's wearing a uniform, holding a gavel, or hiding behind rules and regulations. Because ultimately, power without accountability invariably breeds corruption. And it only takes one person willing to stand up and say enough to start unraveling even the most seemingly untouchable systems of control. The repercussions of our case ignited a national debate on HOA reform. Several state legislatures proposed bills to enhance oversight of homeowners associations and curtail their authority. Media outlets produced investigative reports on similar abuses nationwide, and a grassroots movement advocating for homeowner rights started to build momentum. The public reaction to our story was immense. We got thousands of letters and emails from individuals sharing their own HOA nightmares, many of whom were inspired to challenge corrupt practices in their own communities after hearing about our struggle. The period that followed was not easy for our family. Tyler's physical recovery was arduous. For months, he went through surgeries and physical therapy sessions that often left him in tears, along with the psychological trauma of flashbacks whenever he saw someone in a uniform similar to Reed's. Sarah took a semester off from teaching to assist with his care. There were nights I would find her weeping silently in our bathroom, trying to conceal her pain from Tyler and me. Our savings were drained by medical expenses and security costs, even with the settlement we eventually received from the HOA's insurance company. But we also discovered unexpected strength in the community that rallied around us. Neighbors we hardly knew before the incident became like family. The Chins brought us dinner every Wednesday for months. Elaine Washington, despite her own sorrow, would sit with Tyler for hours, teaching him how to knit as a form of therapy for his injured hands. The Jenkins family, who returned after the arrests, put together a fundraiser that helped pay for Tyler's first year of college. These gestures of kindness renewed our faith in humanity during our most trying times. As for the conspirators, their paths diverged in prison. Karen Whitaker has always maintained her innocence and continues to do so, though her appeals have all been denied. Greg Thompson became a state's witness for a reduced sentence, uncovering further corruption that implicated other county officials not originally charged. Richard Maxwell had a stroke 6 months into his sentence and now needs round-the-clock medical attention. And Marcus Reed, the man who brutalized my son, was stabbed in a prison fight during his first year but survived. I find no satisfaction in that violence, as it only continues the cycle that men like him perpetuate. The most unforeseen turn came from Councilwoman Torres. After serving 2 years, she was granted limited immunity for her testimony in a broader corruption probe involving several major developers in the state. The information she gave led to the indictment of 3 state senators and a federal housing official. Her sentence was shortened, and since her release, she has become a proponent of government transparency, speaking at universities about the slippery slope that led to her downfall. I am still dubious of her redemption story, but Tyler, with his remarkable capacity for growth, agreed to speak with her at an ethics symposium last spring. Judge Harmon, stripped of his position and disbarred, has remained defiantly silent. His wife divorced him soon after his conviction, and former colleagues say he now spends his days in prison penning what he claims will be an exposé on judicial corruption, the many believe it's just an effort to deflect from his own actions. The judicial review triggered by his case uncovered dubious rulings in many of his prior cases, especially those concerning property developers. Several convictions were reversed, and numerous civil judgments are being reconsidered, a stark reminder that corruption in high places can inflict wounds that take years to heal. One of the most significant results was when several law schools started using our case as a teaching model for ethics and property law. Last year, I was invited to speak at Michael's University, addressing a lecture hall full of bright young law students keen to learn how to use their future careers to protect rather than persecute. Tyler was in the front row, taking notes, even though he had heard the story many times. Seeing him there, I felt a deep sense of pride. The road that led him to law school was marked by pain, but he has turned that ordeal into a sense of purpose. The trauma we went through has left its mark on all of us. I still sometimes wake up in a cold sweat, reliving the moment I got that call from the hospital. Sarah has become extremely vigilant about security, having more cameras installed around our home, even though the danger has passed. And Tyler, my courageous, resilient son, still can't stand with his back to an open door, a defensive posture he developed after his assault. These are the unseen scars we bear alongside his physical ones. But we have also grown in ways I never could have imagined. Our family bond, which was already strong, is now unbreakable. We talk more openly about our fears and aspirations, no longer taking our time together for granted. Sarah has used her experience to start a support group for families coping with trauma, which now gathers weekly at the community center. And I have found a new mission in retirement, providing pro bono advice to people fighting systemic injustice in their own communities. Instead of going back to the high-stakes world of federal prosecution, I've found more satisfaction in helping everyday citizens deal with complex legal systems meant to intimidate them. Looking back, I realized that what transpired in Oak Ridge was not an isolated incident. All over America, similar situations occur where power is consolidated among a few who wield it for their own gain at the expense of the many. What made our situation different was our reaction. A community that ultimately refused to be cowed, that chose unity over self-preservation, that understood that justice is not just an idea, but an action that demands courage and persistence. The night before the verdict in Reed's trial, Tyler asked me a question that still echoes in my mind. Do you think things would have turned out differently if we had moved somewhere else? I told him then what I firmly believe now. The issue wasn't Oak Ridge. The issue was letting people who abuse power go unchallenged, whether in a small homeowners association or in the highest positions of authority. Our story is still unfolding. Last month, Tyler was elected president of his law school's Public Interest Law Society, where he is setting up housing rights clinics in underserved areas. Sarah is back to teaching full-time, but now she integrates civics education into her elementary school lessons, believing that understanding one's rights and duties should start at a young age. And I have been collaborating with a bipartisan group of lawmakers to create model HOA reform legislation that balances property rights with sensible community governance. The bill, which we aim to introduce in the next legislative session, has been dubbed Tyler's Law by its supporters. The revitalized Oak Ridge community hosted its first annual block party this summer. Families who had been turned against each other under Karen's rule now shared food, stories, and laughter in the same park pavilion where we had first admired the neighborhood years ago. Children played without the threat of arbitrary security patrols, and senior citizens relaxed in lawn chairs, talking freely without fear of being overheard by the community board. It was the neighborhood we had envisioned when we first moved in, not flawless, but authentic. As the evening came to a close, a neighbor I didn't know well came up to me, with a toddler on his hip. "We moved in after all that happened," he said, "but I wanted to say thank you. My parents lost their home to an HOA scheme in Florida. Places like this, where people support each other instead of policing each other, are rare. My daughter will grow up somewhere better because you didn't give up." That moment, more than any courtroom win or media attention, made the whole arduous journey worthwhile. Because ultimately, our story isn't really about HOA corruption, real estate fraud, or even justice being served. It's about what happens when ordinary people refuse to believe that things can't change. It's about the community we can create when we choose courage over comfort and solidarity over silence. And it's about the world we pass on to the next generation. A world where my son and that man's daughter can live without being afraid of those who would abuse power for their own gain. If you are facing your own fight against corruption or injustice, know that you are not alone. The systems designed to make you feel powerless rely on the belief that you are isolated, that resistance is pointless, and that power is unassailable. But our experience shows that is not true. Find your allies. Collect your evidence. Trust your intuition. The road will not be easy. Ours certainly was not. But on the other side is not just the justice you are fighting for, but the community you deserve. This is Robert Sullivan, reporting from the new and improved Oakage Estates, where we no longer live in fear of opening our mail or answering our doors, where my son can walk with his head held high, his scars a symbol not of defeat, but of resilience, and where we have demonstrated that justice, though sometimes delayed, can ultimately triumph over even the most deeply rooted corruption.